This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. Improving the lives of dogs across Canada and around the world is a hefty goal. But by talking about the lives of wild dogs, Dr. Valli Fraser-Celin is getting closer to reaching that goal every day. Dr. Fraser-Celin, who has worked with African wild dogs, dogs in Indigenous communities in Canada, and identifying how a One Health approach makes an impact, is breaking down misconceptions, providing resources, and creating community programs. All from an Instagram account at The Lives of Wild Dogs. While I'm a big fan of the account and want to tell you all about it, the best thing for you to do is head over to at The Lives of Wild Dogs on Instagram while you listen to Dr. Fraser-Celin here on Defender Radio discuss her journey to supporting people and dogs, how pet pantries can make an impact, what she hopes to achieve, and how a single television trainer introduced and perpetuated one of the biggest dog myths there is. So long before we get to the incredible Lives of Wild Dogs, we have to go through a bit of an adventure. Could you share a bit of that adventure, how you got to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, it actually goes before that. So it starts back in, I guess the first time I went to South Africa was in 2007. I was volunteering for kind of a wildlife organization, and I just fell in love with Africa, as many people do. And I came back from that. Then the next year traveled throughout Africa a little bit more. And then after I came back from the 3 months that I spent traveling through Africa, I started a master's in library studies, which, is a little bizarre, but going from, traveling in Africa, going to do a master's in library studies. And while I was finishing up my master's, I got a 4-month volunteer position in South Africa at the Southern African Wildlife College, which is just outside of the Kruger National Park. It's an amazing spot, very, very beautiful. They do a lot of work around conservation, and they train a lot of folks in conservation. So I was supposed to be there for 4 months and stayed for a year and a half. And when I came back to Canada after that year and a half, basically living in the bush, listening to lions roaring at night and, watching cheetah on my lunch breaks, I the geography program at the University of Guelph, and my supervisor, Dr. Alice Savorka, was amazing. She took me on as a student to study. She had a whole research project on the lives of animals in Botswana. So all of her students focused on different animals. So that included donkeys and cattle and elephants and African wild dogs, which is what I studied. So I went on to do my PhD in geography, basically human animal relationships, human environment geography. And I was studying human African wild dog conflict and conservation in Botswana. So that was my PhD focus. And after that, I did some postdoc studies in community health sciences at the University of Calgary. And that's where I really started digging into dogs in Indigenous communities and access to veterinary care. So that's what really kind of got me on the path to focusing on domestic dogs, and just got really interested in dogs. They're kind of like this, like creature that's like a very much a part of our lives, yet we kind of just tend to take that for granted. I think the fact that we share our spaces with dogs, and there's they've been domesticated for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So that kind of sparked my interest in dogs and dog behavior. And of course, the work I was doing with Indigenous communities, there's a lot of dog bites and dog behavior and issues up there. So everything kind of melded together. And I got a northern dog. I adopted a northern dog, and kind of went down this rabbit hole on dog training, and started this Instagram account, which was, to advocate for humane dog training methods and kind of debunking, the pack mentality and the pack leadership training methods that we know are super mainstream, thanks to
Hmm.
Mr. Caesar Milan, more generally speaking. But it's very pervasive in the dog training world, and I just relied a lot on my PhD and learning about African wild dogs, which, are very, very similar to wolf behavior as well. So they're often called the wolves of Africa. So I was able to really lean on my knowledge of African wild dog behavior, and then also, working with, domestic dogs in northern communities where they are free roaming. So you see a
Hmm.
lot of like that behavior as well, and just trying to, debunk all of these myths around the fact that dogs are not wolves and
Yeah.
they don't act like wolves, and nor should they be trained as if, we were wolves and they were wolves. And not that I'm
Hmm.
saying that wolves should be trained the way that Caesar Milan trains dogs. There's a lot of wolves out there at sanctuaries that are trained, with positive reinforcement and
Yep.
clicker training. So we know we can train a lot of wildlife that don't have that history of domestication. So why would we be training dogs that have this like, long history of cooperatively working with humans and being around humans for a long time, so we have that bond and we have that capacity to train them without the use of aversive tools and aversive techniques. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I landed here. It's a long story, but it's a little quirky, but here we
Hmm.
are.
And it's great. Where you've landed is wonderful. The work you've done is outstanding too. It's worth saying. You've done a
Oh,
lot
thank
of
you.
good for a lot of places and a lot of animals and people. So that is very much needing to be acknowledged as well. Though we are talking about now, and I think what's interesting, and I'd like to start with the wolf concept, because this is something too. When I was introduced to dog training and everything, is it's in your face. Or at the time, it was very. If you look up dog training, if you go to a bookstore and look at dog training books, it was very heavily influenced by this alpha concept,
Yeah.
the power, or not power roles, the dominance roles, and
Yes.
pinches and touches
Yeah.
and yanks and corrections. And in some ways, there is a logic to it, because you can get a result with that. But I'm curious, sort of, you came into the dog training having seen wild dogs first, and having seen them so on the continent of Africa, in Ontario, in Manitoba communities. Manitoba, I think, right? Primarily?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
domestic dogs in Manitoba, a
Yeah.
bit up in the Northwest Territories, but I've seen free roaming dogs, and I was in India, so I was able to see a lot of free roaming dogs there. Africa has a ton of free roaming dogs, so a lot of, you know, exposure to free roaming dogs, even though I wasn't studying them, but
Yeah.
able to see how they live as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, so a lot of exposure.
Yeah, the indigenous communities are very interesting. There is an entire colonialist causation, I think, behind where a lot of those issues may rise from. And it comes down to then it follows up with the lack of resources in terms of training,
Yeah,
veterinary care, etc.
yeah.
But I'm curious. So you've observed wild dogs all over the world in all these different places, and then you start getting into training and hearing these stories of, well, dogs are like wolves, so we need to treat them like wolves, and this is how wolves do it. So this is how we should. It's a simplification, but that is, I think, at the core a lot of that messaging.
Hmm.
And I'm
Yeah.
curious, as someone who had studied wild dogs, did you think, oh yeah, they were behaving like wolves, or did you have an immediate different sort of observation?
So, I mean, so African wild dogs are basically the wolves of Africa. So they're very, very similar in their like social structures, in their ecology. They have, they're one of the most endangered large carnivores in sub-Saharan Africa. They have, they work in packs, they hunt together, there's a lot of um, very similar social structures and social behavior to wolves. I haven't had the opportunity to do a lot of like observation of wolves, but I've read a lot about wolves, in the peer-reviewed scholarship when I was doing my PhD around
Hmm.
African wild dogs, because they're so similar. So, when you think about like when I think about the seeing African wild dogs in the wild, like I'm not thinking like, oh, this is very similar to dogs.
Yeah.
Like they're just the behaviors, the whole social structure is so different. I mean, dogs are not pack animals. They don't tend to form these, packs of dogs that are related. There's no sort of reproductive suppression from, the quote unquote alpha male and female, which literally just means breeding pair. There's no, female dogs are promiscuous, so they will, mate with several male dogs, or several male dogs will mate with a female. So, the male dog doesn't help with the, raising the pups. So there's no like sort of pack structure there. They might form these like loose groups that, come together over accessing resources, and then they kind of like disperse. I know there have been some groups of dogs that have stayed together for longer than, kind of the norm. There have been observations in India around dogs that kind of stay together, and they are like, kin, or they are related to each other, but that's not something that we tend to see, generally speaking. And, the studies that were done around wolves, back in, the early 1900s and mid 1900s, those studies they weren't observing wolves in their natural state. They had brought together a bunch of wolves, put them in an enclosure, and, they're not related. Of course, they're going to fight. Of course, there's going to be access to resource issues. Dominance has been misappropriated by the dog training world. If you ask a wildlife biologist about dominance, there's no like weird stuff around dominance. They're just like, oh yeah, dominance. But if you throw that word around in the dog training world, it has a completely different connotation. So, there's a lot of the words and the concepts that have been taken by dog trainers, from the wildlife biology and from, wildlife, and misconstrued to represent different things in the dog training world. So it's really unfortunate, that that's happened, because it has harmed a lot of dogs, over the last several decades with this type of training. And, we also have to remember that we're not wolves. Like, we're not dogs and we're not wolves. So, even that type of training has, dogs are not thinking like, oh, you're mimicking, my ancestor from, thousands of years ago. Like, that's not what dogs are thinking. I mean, I'm pretty confident that's not what they're thinking. It can't be in their brains, but I'm pretty confident that. But yeah, it's just been so misappropriated and so misconstrued that, there's been a lot of harm training, and it's 2024. The studies have shown that this type of training does have negative welfare impacts on dogs. It's not good for them. It's just, none of it is good. So it's time to throw it in the trash where it belongs. But, for some reason, it's still very pervasive. And, we've talked about this on a previous, podcast episode around wolves, and how people are very enamored with wolves. And, I think there's something there about how people want to be close to wolves, but, in taking this aspect of like being part of the wolf pack, I think is something that's very romantic to people. And this is I think the detriment of that, unfortunately, is very it's very detrimental to dogs. So
it's also with what I have learned over the years in much less academic related settings, but by talking with academics like yourself and being involved in various aspects of dog training in the dog world, through agility and performance and stuff, you can watch dogs who are being walked who are. There was someone in one of my old neighborhoods. He had two dogs. They walked in perfect lockstep with him. They never veered for more than a foot from his side. And they looked so bored on their walks because it was, this is what we do. And if we don't do it, we get shocked effectively. We get yanked on, depending on which tool he was using that day. Whereas I would walk with JJ and it's okay, which way do you want to go?
Yeah.
If you're pulling, that means you're really interested. It doesn't mean you're being a jerk. It means you're really interested in something. So I'm going to let you explore that. And the second you start making those decisions, the relationship instantly changes because they realize, oh, I can communicate with you in some way. Whereas when you're dominating constantly, you're not allowing for that communication to occur. You're just saying,
Absolutely.
do it or else, over and
Yeah.
over and over and over. And you
Yeah.
can do that with while loving. I think there's a lot of really interesting psychology there that neither of us are capable of getting into professionally. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah, it does very much seem to come from that aspect of I need to be in control of this,
Yes.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
which in nature doesn't really happen that way. It's
Mhm.
a lot of ebb and flow and things sort of crashing up against each other and then either coalescing or moving away again. And
Yeah.
um, I can see that with behavior, and then it just now my brain's going on a rampage of wildlife feeding issues because it's the exact same thing that we're going to be talking about with positive reinforcements. We're teaching them.
Yeah.
But let's get into that. So, on the Lives of Wild Dogs account,
Hmm.
which is it's a wonderful place. There's links all over for it in this podcast episode, and you can just search for the Lives of Wild Dogs, and it'll come up. There's a lot of conversation you generate about
Hmm.
what dog trainers might say and about some of the very, I'd say, common misconceptions. So, what an e-collar is, we've already talked a little bit about pack versus social. Um,
Hmm.
and then, most recently you've got 6 reasons dogs aren't wolves, and things like that. How has that gone for you? Have you had a generally positive response? Have you seen people engaging in intelligent conversation and learning, or has it been a little bit of disruption?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it is, I am a disruptor, so that's kind of my aim is to also disrupt.
Hmm.
I do think it's important for people to, you know, very clearly understand that dogs are not wolves and that, that type of training is detrimental to people or to dogs, to people too, actually.
Hmm.
Because it does impact the human dog bond, like you were saying, right?
Yeah.
Like it is very much, um, I think that aspect of control is very very pervasive. Like, there's a very much this kind of idea that you have to control your dog, that your dog has to comply with what you're saying. And, if they don't, then, there's very much a narrative around like, well, if you don't, your dog doesn't comply, your dog will like run into the street and get hit by a car and die. And it's this
Hmm.
very like extreme, you know, position that these types of dog trainers take. And, we know that dogs will blow off their e-collar all the time. So, a leash is your best bet.
Hmm.
And your dog shouldn't be off leash in the city, right? Like,
Yep.
that does happen. There are accidents do happen, and that's not the fault of the owner at all. It just, sometimes it happens. But yeah, I do think there's very much this attitude of like compliance and having, having it's very reinforcing for people to have control over another being, and whether that's kind of an underlying like feeling that you get or there's something about it. So I think there is very much this compliance and control that we really need to kind of throw out the window, because we do control, our pet dogs. We control most of their lives, right? Like
Hmm.
we decide when they're going to eat, when they're going to go outside, when they're going to go for a walk, who they're going to interact with, who they're not going to interact with, when they get a treat, when they, there's so much that we control. So for me, it's really about, trying to focus on dog agency and allowing them more control over their lives. Like you were saying, like let them choose which direction they want to go in their on their walk. And I think there's been this, I know Cesar Millan has really put the like, physical exercise is like the number one. And then I can't remember his second thing. And then affection comes last. And so I think physical exercise has really been, a tired dog is a good dog, like all that messaging around, like you need to tire your dog out in order for your dog to be compliant
Hmm.
to your requests or to have a better behavior. And there's a lot of studies coming out now that are showing that, it's not just physical exercise, mental stimulation is so important. And the wildlife people and the zoo people are way ahead of us on
Oh
this
yeah.
in terms of enrichment and, getting, providing that sort of enrichment to animals who are captive. But like dogs are captive animals, like,
Hmm.
they get bored. And that's when you see a lot of these behaviors that come up that might be undesirable to people. So, having that allowing for sniffing, allowing for control over their own lives, choosing directions, like, you know, communicating with you is so important for
Yeah.
their welfare, and it is related to their welfare. Agency, having control over your environment, having some control aspect of control over yourself and your needs is very um, linked to animal welfare. So, that's kind of where I focus. And I think I didn't answer your question, but I have a lot of people who, to circle back, a lot of folks have messaged me and been like, "You've changed my mind. You've improved the relationship that I've had with my dogs." But, at the same time, I've had to limit my comments to followers only because it is a very, hot topic. It causes a lot of emotions. A lot of people don't want to like get out of that aspect. And I think it comes back to a lot of like what we were talking about, where, wolves are romantic. Wolves, if you're saying that, oh, I'm the dog whisperer, my dog is like an apex predator, then,
Yeah.
you have this kind of like, there's an ego to it, right? Where you're saying, oh yeah, well, I've been able to train my high prey drive dog or whatever with, and it just, I think it's, punishment is very reinforcing for the punisher, and I think that goes a long way. And you have to really take a look at how you think about your animals and how you think about your pets, and how it makes you feel as a person, as a dog guardian. Like,
Hmm.
is this my ego? Is this the best thing for is this really the best thing that I should be doing for my dog? So, I try to unpack a lot of those issues. I think for the most part, people are pretty receptive. I've gotten some great comments, back and forth, good conversations, but there's definitely been times where it has, brought out a lot of like anger and, um, just, I think people are shocked to hear those things, and they're not just not ready to kind of
Yeah.
go there. So, yeah.
Well, and interestingly, you have a great post on responsible anthropomorphism, and I think it's a great little tie-in here. So,
Mhm.
anthropomorphism is generally applying what we would consider human experiences, reactions, emotions onto
Yeah.
non-human animals, just as a base explanation. And
Mhm.
we are frequently, that it is a negative thing to do,
Yeah.
particularly when we're talking about wildlife, particularly if we're trying to have fact-based conversations. Well, you
Mhm.
can't apply emotion to them because either we don't know, they don't have it, it doesn't matter, whichever one of the excuses is used. But
Mhm.
you make the argument that anthropomorphism is good for animals at times. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that, because I think for this audience, it's something we hear about constantly as a negative.
Yeah. Apps does kind of provide a lens toward stronger empathy with animals, because you can share experiences with animals. And we know with dogs that they have, cognition levels of a toddler up to
Hmm.
2, 3 years old. So they are experiencing similar emotions to us. So to be able to know which emotions they're feeling and understanding their body language, there is a way to create that empathy through kind of anthropomorphizing in a very, responsible way. If you are someone who understands body language and understands, how dogs emote, like we can have that empathy, and we can have those shared experiences with them. So I think there is something there that it doesn't have to be this like, you know, anthropomorphism is bad. Like,
Yeah.
there can be ways to have like to anthropomorphize dogs and other animals in ways that does provide a lens for us to, have a bit more empathy towards their experiences and think about things from their point of view, right? And think about their lives from their point of view. So I think there's a way to use anthropomorphism in a way that is beneficial, and not, extend it to, you know, what comes to mind is, this is like such a random example, but they sent a chimpanzee up to space.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And then it was on the cover of like Time magazine when the chimpanzee came back from
Hmm.
space, and it had this big smile on its face, and people totally misinterpreted smiling as a positive thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in chimpanzee behavior, it's, fear-based, it's conflict, like that's not a positive thing. So that's an example where, we can misinterpret certain body language because we're anthropomorphizing in, a negative way. But I think anthropomorphism allows you to extend your ability to understand animals that doesn't center humans. So if we're thinking in like an anthropocentric way where everything is around the human ability, like I would kind of change that to anthropomorphism being more of a way that you can extend your understanding and your empathy towards animals by thinking about them and
Hmm.
their life experiences and their point of views.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. I remember Dr. Mark Beckhoff one time expressing to me that we don't know that dogs feel happy the same way we feel happy, but we know they feel
Mhm.
something like happy that we feel. We don't
Right.
know that they feel fear the way we feel fear, but we know
Yeah,
they experience it in the way a dog experience. And it's a little bit of a mind bender
it is. Yeah.
philosophy thing, but it does make sense in that we can't know 100%. And that's
Mhm.
true of most things in life, right? Like we
Yeah.
can test and repeat, but you just
Mhm.
need that one dog to sneeze at you instead, and the whole study goes out the window. So I think we have to make a little bit of a leap of faith to
Mhm.
start. But then
Yeah.
it's the branching out from there. Again, with JJ using that relationship, by the end, she could communicate to me what she needed so
Mhm.
simply because we spent
Yes.
so much time together, and I got to a point where I just started accepting she is trying to tell me something, and I
Mhm.
will do something and see how she reacts. And either she reacts in a positive way or a less than positive way. So
Mhm.
if she stands up and looks at the door, oh, well, do you want to go for a walk? No. Do you want to go see if someone's outside so you can bark at them? Yes. Right? So
Right.
it's if
Yeah.
she looks at the door, then does she look at her leash or does she keep looking at the door? And that was the
Mhm.
difference. But that's just
Yeah.
me observing it, imagining the possibility that she's trying to tell me something, and then deducing from the available information what it likely is and testing. Right. And
Yeah.
it sounds nerdy, but it's how we live life. It's how we experience things. It's just
Mhm.
applying those terms and the step by step process of it to that experience. And I think anyone in a new relationship with a
Yeah.
human, even, you need to find out how they react to something. And does your
Yeah.
upset look the same as my upset? I'm
Exactly.
classically neurodivergent in that I crush everything inside so no one can see it. Um, and that makes it difficult sometimes for people to know, right? It's like, yeah, I do have depression and anxiety and a huge amount of social anxiety. I'll
Mhm.
still get up on stage and be silly in front of a bunch of people and do things like this, but you wouldn't know that just by watching. It's only through observation over time. And anyway, going down a rabbit hole there,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Yeah.
and on that, there's a lot going on with the wild lives of dogs, and I don't want our conversation to cycle only about my interest in the things you've posted, which we could do a couple hours on, I think.
I'm sure we could. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few elements that you've been doing here, though, that I think are really worth getting into. And I'm going to
Mhm.
start with the more recent one, and that's the pet pantry. And I
Yeah.
love this, and it's something we're hearing a lot about as a
Mm.
need, but this is one of the few times where I have seen someone go, and here's the solution. So could you share a bit about what the pet pantry project is, just to keep it nice
Mhm.
and peas? I can't think of the word for that now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of stemming from my work in animal shelters and access to veterinary care and access to pet care resources, um, my friend and neighbor just and I saw we live in a middle to low income neighborhood and we kind of wanted to help, folks in our neighborhood and help pets in our neighborhood. And we, were kind of thinking of a way of how to do this. And we thought about a pet pantry. And so, we know that food insecurity is becoming more prevalent in, for people, especially people who are low income or on a fixed income or retired or on disability. So we knew that, food insecurity is growing and therefore probably pet food insecurity is growing.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of stats around this in Canada. There's more in the US, but PetSmart Charities of Canada did a survey back in, I think, 2022. The results were published in 2023, and they found that 77% of Canadians would forego their own meals in order to feed their pets.
Mhm.
We also know there's a lot of waste, in food in general, and
Yep.
that would include pet food. So we were able to, gather donations. We put a little bit of our own money in at first, but not too much. But yeah, we contacted our community center because they had a bit of it's not exactly a food bank program, but it's called the Good Food Bag, and they basically put together a bag of vegetables and fruit for folks who need it, and they sell it at an affordable price.
Mhm.
So we contacted them, and they were super into, having us there at the same time, and we would hand out pet food while people were, getting their good food.
Mhm.
So, we kind of said, like, we know that there's, this food insecurity that's happening. Clearly, you do as well. Probably people who are food insecure are going to be pet food insecure if they have pets. So why don't we set up at the same time, and we can kind of take this One Health approach to, you know, tackling some food insecurity. And yeah, we started last November, and we've been, at the community center almost every week, every Tuesday for a couple hours, and we hand
Mhm.
out some pet food. And we've really, it's been such a great experience. We've met, a lot of really cool folks and their pets as well. Some people bring their dogs in when they come to get their food. And yeah, it's been really amazing. It's been a great experience. And, I think it kind of ties into this access, trying to tackle this access to resources and being in your community, like not just focusing on, you know, everyone, right? Like it takes these small steps and building your community and building up your neighborhood and contributing in a way that is really affecting people in a positive way. So, and making a difference, making a direct impact in people's lives has been really amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's lovely to see, and again, as you said, the One Health approach there, folks,
Mhm.
and I think we're very overwhelmed by the world around us. I am on a daily basis. Part of my job is to read the news, and whoa, it's not going great. Things aren't great. I don't know if you picked up on
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's folks are overwhelmed, and when we start talking about, well, how do we improve outcomes for dogs overall in Canada? And so, well, one of the first steps is we want fewer dogs to end up in shelters. I think everyone
Yeah.
can agree to. We want as many dogs to stay in homes as possible. Well, what's
Mhm.
one of the top reasons? I know there's a lot of reasons, but one of the top reasons people don't maintain a pet is they can't afford to. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of other stuff too, but that is one
Yeah.
of the reasons. So this seems to be a very positive, practical, accessible, affordable step to
Mhm.
reducing negative outcomes for pets across the country. Which and again, I think the significance of that is very huge, really. And I'm curious if you can talk a bit about you've set up an outline, a training program for this, for the pet pantry, and if you could tell us a
I
bit about
did.
that and how
Yeah.
people can get involved.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I, was talking about the pet pantry on my Instagram a little bit, and I started noticing people were, asking questions and, were interested in this initiative. And I have a friend in Toronto who has a little free kind of pet pantry set up at her house. It's super cute. And I just, noticed that people were asking questions, kind of showing interest. So I was like, well, why don't I create this mini course on how to set up a pet pantry? So I developed that course. It is available to purchase. It's pretty cheap.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just wanted to also make it accessible to people,
Yeah.
right? So, but yeah, so it's basically it outlines, what a pet pantry is, the different models of pet pantries, the pros and cons of those models, so you can kind of pick and choose what would be a better fit for you. And then it also, goes from setting up the pet pantry to, if you want to work with an organization like a community center or a food bank, the different ways that you can approach that, to basically outlining how we, label food, how we bag food, handing out food, how do you get donations. I've also included some templates that people can download as well. So advertising templates, Instagram templates that they could download and just, advertise with that. I have a data collection one as well, and an impact report template and an email template as well that
Mhm.
people can use to email organizations, to basically see if they're interested. So it's a pretty, step by step, simple, it makes it kind of easy to understand how to set a pet pantry up. And, I've really relied on my experience, but also the experience that I've gained through, just being involved in access to pet care for the last few years. And I'm part of a working group, a pet food pantry working group as well. So I've learned a lot from them. So yeah, I just kind of culminated all that knowledge and developed a course. And it's, something that I hope people can take and implement in their own communities, because it really is an achievable way to make an impact in your community. And I think that's what people are really looking for. So
Yeah, I think it's great, and I agree. I hope people really take it up as an opportunity. We've seen a lot of small pantry projects overall here in East Hamilton.
great.
There's a lot of need, and we
Yeah.
do see here and there. It's they replaced their little library with a little can cupboard,
Yes.
because little
Yeah.
library is cute and helpful for a community. Little can cupboard can go a lot farther than a cute little library can. And
Yeah.
that's not slagging little libraries. I quite enjoy them as well. Um, Now, to wrap up, I think a great place to do this, or a great way to do this, is for me to simply ask you, what are the things people can do, sort of just starting out today, to try and improve the lives of their dogs, improve the lives of dogs in their community? Like, I, for one, when I see someone yank on a dog, I have, and I avoid doing this, but I have spoken to the person about the aggressive tendencies it reinforces and so on. But I don't think I'm a great communicator in that moment, and I'm not sure the message is being well received. So I often feel like I'm not helping. And I'm wondering, for others maybe in that way, how can we help? And if there's perhaps something like one specific message you get a lot to, or anything like that, that you'd like to address.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation, and I think it's really hard for people to navigate that.
Hmm.
One thing that I would tell people is really listen to your gut, right? Like that's what happened to me. I got pulled into, you know, uh, different training techniques that I just wasn't comfortable with, and it just didn't resonate with me. It wasn't the type of training I wanted to do with my dog. It wasn't the type of relationship I wanted with my dog. And it was really about like listening to my gut feeling. So like, if someone is working with a trainer and, they feel there's something there that tells you this doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
My dog doesn't really like this, or I don't really like this, then listen to that gut feeling, because it might just make, a huge difference for the way that you train and the way that, your dog lives out the rest of their life, because, they have short lives compared to us, right? So, I mean, I just want my dog to just have as much control and choice and agency, over their own lives that, we don't give that very much to dogs. And that's something that I've really learned by watching free roaming dogs, right?
Hmm.
They have so much control over their lives. They have so much agency. And I think we can learn a lot from those dogs into how we can improve the lives of our pet dogs and our the dogs that live in our houses with us and share our lives with us. We don't No one gets a dog, a companion, really, to then put a shock collar on their dog, right?
Yeah.
Like most people don't, and they don't want to have an antagonistic relationship, or a relationship of conflict with their dog. Like, you people get dogs because they want a companion. They want to share their lives with another animal. And um, I think that, certain training techniques can really be detrimental to that relationship. And I think that people just really need to think critically, seek out different resources, different ways of training, and, not blame themselves if they've, worked with a trainer, because the dog training industry is unregulated. Anyone can
Hmm.
wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm going to be a dog trainer today," and not have any education, not need any certifications. There's no licensing, there's nothing. It's just whoever wants to be a dog trainer can start a business, and I think that's a huge problem in our
Hmm.
industry, is that there is no regulation, and it really confuses dog owners and dog guardians in that way. So I think it really is about trying to navigate that in a way that isn't It's hard. It is really hard, but trying to find, resources from people who have credentials, people
Mm.
who, are looking toward the science and the peer-reviewed literature and the scholarship and using that as a way to train dogs in the best, within the best practices and the most modern techniques. And I mean, just stop watching Caesar Milan at the end of the day. Just if he gets on TV, and I'm sorry, Caesar. Like I know, I'm sure he really loves dogs. I'm sure there's something there. He clearly wants, what's best, but it's just been such a detriment to, the dog training industry, and it's just really, really created some really, you know, really, I think it's just created like conflict, really
Yeah,
relationships of conflict with your dog and relationships of like hierarchy, and that isn't there. It's just
yeah,
not something that we really see in dogs on a general basis. There might be some, there's always some dogs that will form these, there might be some pack kind of structures, but it's really not that's not
yeah,
the norm. And that's just not, like I said, we're not dogs, we're not wolves, we're not able to communicate in the same way that they can communicate with each other. And we shouldn't be trying. We should be trying to find a way to meet in the middle. And that's, I think, where really like the clicker training and the positive reinforcement training is that's what they're doing. They're really
yeah.
really meeting dogs where they are and finding ways to communicate with dogs that's not rooted in control and conflict and aggression and hierarchy and dominance. So yeah, that's what I would say. That was pretty long-winded, but in a
It's right, though.
day.
It's great.
Yeah, yeah.
To learn more about Dr. Valli Fraser-Celin and her work, check out @The Lives of Wild Dogs on Instagram. Links are available in the show notes in your podcast player or at defenderradio.com. I want to thank Valli for joining us and all of you for listening. Remember to follow the Fur Bearers on social media for updates on the podcast and our campaigns. Find us by searching for The Fur Bearers or use the links in this week's show notes. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bearers, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.